Bringing the vision into a mission. This is Global Mission of Peace with the GoldFish Report on February 12th, 2016. And I am joined here with Winston Shrout. Hello, Winston.
Oh.
John Otrin.
Hello there. How are you?
Martin Wilbur.
Hello.
We also have the voice of the dragon, the ambassador of the dragon family. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. And welcome.
And Louisa, our media outreach, who will give us a little more depth about our guests.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the GoldFish Report. This is a special report that we have today. We are going to focus on law, but law in a way that most people are not familiar with. And it's really the different kinds of law and private ways that you navigate our legal system. And we have our very special guest today, Winston Shrout. And Winston, we want to thank you so much for joining us. Winston, I know a little bit about your background. I know that you're from the South, and so is my family, so we're like neighbors. And I know you have studied. You have a degree in psychology, and you also did some carpentry work, and spent some time in the military. So you have an interesting background and perspective. How did you really start to focus in on studying the law and commerce, the whole issue of commerce?
Just a brief recap. Yeah, I did work as a construction worker, carpenter, welder, and all kind of things. I was able to retire, which was a good thing. I was pretty busted up. But in any event, in 1998, started studying. Some of the things that came to my attention very quickly were not the particular law forms that most people are familiar with, but we got into a system which was known as commercial redemption. Now, this traced back certainly to the change in money in 1933 and the things that came from that. But we launched into a study of commerce from that perspective, which really, after everything is said and done, does not fit into any particular law forum. It would probably fit into what we would initially call maritime, which had been blended into admiralty law. I hate to use those terms because of the whole basis of everything is contract law, and everything stems from contract. I mean, the reason we're on this planet is because of a soul contract. And so I'm here under contract, you're here under contract, and so forth. And so our very existence depends on that. What I discovered very early on was that all law is a result of the contract. For instance, if people get into contract, if all parties are satisfied, the contract executes, everybody goes their way happy. But if there's a breach in that contract, then the law of the contract is the remedy for the breach. Far too many people look at the law first and do not look at the initial contract. And in consequence of that, it's kind of like getting the cart before the horse, because you have to, the law only exists based upon some contract. So once I discovered those things, then I started to study. I had an opportunity. I mean, in those days, there was very little information on these concepts. I had to travel wide and far to find anybody that knew anything. And so at the first, things were very, very slow as far as the learning process. I did have the opportunity to get information from some very talented and knowledgeable people. And so I was able to set my foundation in these concepts, basically from the very best sources. Today on the internet, we have thousands of sources making all kinds of claims. Some of them are correct, some of them are not. But in any event, for my benefit, I was able to get the basic concepts and technology and so forth firmly affixed at the very start. And then as time went on, various study groups, from time to time I would be called on to speak at a workshop or a seminar or something like that. And then in 2004, I decided to create a educational program. And the consequence of that, we developed a program known as Solutions in Commerce, later known as Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce. And we've been operating as that for over 11 years now. I've done seminars across the United States, across Canada, until they got mad up there and wouldn't let me come back in. And then we've been in Australia a number of times, New Zealand, London, England, Panama, and some of those places. And so we've been able to at least influence people to perhaps open their eyes a bit. A lot of people have, various problems, all ranging from all the way, from traffic tickets to mortgage foreclosures to all kinds of things. And so these are the subjects that we have addressed and attempted to develop technology that would assist. Now, the last seminar I did, which was done up at ESETI Ranch, I think many of your viewers and perhaps yourself are familiar with James Gilliland.
Right.
In the ESETI Ranch. The last seminar we did there, I titled it in this manner, which was releasing or removing your commercial karma. A lot of people across the globe are certainly becoming more and more enlightened. They're trying to attain higher and higher spiritual levels and so forth. But then the problem is they have this third dimensional concept, and it's only a concept, by the way. They have this karma, this concept of debt. Now, debt's a four-letter word. It's only a concept. It does not exist in reality. And so many of those who were attempting, various techniques for enlightenment, uplifting, ascension, and all those kind of subjects were still burdened with some of these other third dimensional concepts and so forth. So then the purpose of that seminar, certainly at ESETI, would be on a spiritual level, as much as we were attempting to demonstrate the nature of what people were facing, which was holding them back from their spiritual ascension. And so that's kind of where we've gone.
Let me, if I could, just for a moment, Winston, jump in right where you are there and see if the ambassador had anything he wanted to comment on this concept of debt, because you're saying that it doesn't exist in reality, but it seems that we are basically all debt slaves, though, to this Federal Reserve System. So on one hand, we seem to be debt slaves, but on the other hand, you're saying, so where's the disconnect? Where is it that what is it that we don't understand? Because,
are you asking me?
Yes. Well, I'm sorry if the ambassador was going to join in, but if he had a comment.
Well, look at the law of physics, conservation of energy. Energy is never lost. It might be transferred into the form of matter, or matter might be transformed into energy and so forth, but it's never, ever lost. And so if someone is claiming a debt, then there also has to be the credit to offset that debt. Now, credit is also a concept. These words, debt and credit, have resulted because of our change in money in 1933, and then the accounting, which was created, which is known as double entry bookkeeping. And so the concept of debt and credit in our present system is wholly depending upon the accounting, because we're not in our present commerce, we're not talking about substance. We're talking about negotiable instruments. And in consequence of that, it's, if people really understood the concepts of money, they would see that. Now, in previous generations, they used substance as money. For instance, gold, silver, wampum, tobacco, beads, or whatever. And so, but when we got to the 1933 period of time, due to the plan of the experts, and let me explain that. There was an attempt, certainly after World War I, to stop war. I think Hirohito and some of those others were petitioning for that. And this is a program that actually had been formulated by Saint Germain for several centuries. I mean, I was just listening to an interview, one of your interviews with the ambassador, where he was talking about M1 and all those kind of things. Well, that was all a part of the plan of the experts, which was finally formalized in 1928. And that plan provided for the commercial system as we have it at present. But what that called for was a removal of gold bullion and to be held in trust so that all the nations could have equal access to the gold bullion as the collateral for their respective currencies. Now, this is what's known today as the collateral accounts. Now, the collateral accounts, regardless of what Neil or Karen or whoever says, is still under the control of Dr. Ray C. Dam. He is the sole heir. And so, you know, a lot of this flim-flam you hear coming across the internet is just exactly that. But again, the purpose of it was initially to prevent war so that everyone would have equal access to the gold so they could create their currencies according to, you know, whatever system or formula that they had. And so that happened. And so in 1933, in our country and actually across the planet, these plans were instituted. So the gold was taken up, and to replace the gold, at least in our system, we went to the use of negotiable instruments. And so you find in all the countries and all the currencies, you know, when you say gold-backed currency, you're referring to their use of the collateral accounts as the surety or the guarantee for their currency, but the currency itself is still just negotiable instruments. That operates under negotiable instrument law, and the accounting system that was set up to deal with this type of money is called double entry bookkeeping. I think everybody's familiar with that. You know, you have the T-square with the plus and the minus, or the credit and the debit. And the goal of the accounting then, of course, is to arrive at a zero balance so that we have equity or parity or fairness, or whatever you want to call it. So that's actually the system we work with. And that's why I said that the concept of debt and credit is only a concept. And if properly understood, it's actually very easy to function in.
Okay, so I'm not sure. Does the ambassador want to jump in right now with any comments or questions? Because, you know, we really...
No, I would like Winston to continue because I think he's on the right path here, and I wouldn't like to disturb him in his talks. And in the end, I will ask some questions.
Okay. So, all right then. So having said that, Winston, I think... how does then, what is governing this plan of the experts, and are we still under this plan of the experts right now?
Yes, the problem came when the plan, once it was instituted and the various institutions were established. For instance, this plan called for the Federal Reserve System, for the United Nations, for the Bank of International Settlements, for the World Court, and for all these various things. I mean, these are a part of the plan. And if properly instituted, would have resolved the problem. But as chance would have it, these things were not properly instituted and actually taken over. In consequence of some of these problems, we did go into World War II. And I mean, there's a lot of things that could be said about why that happened and how it happened and how, you know, how Hitler got out of control and did all these things. But at the end of the war, the powers that be, the royal families, how many of them there are, I don't know. 100, maybe the ambassador knows. Certainly he's associated with one of them, or many of them perhaps, in the Red Dragon. But anyway, those families said, hey, You know, this is terrible. We need to rebuild, obviously. I mean, many of the countries have simply been blown apart. Much of Europe, certainly Japan, the United States did not suffer too much, but some of the other countries and so forth were literally blown apart. And so those things had to be rebuilt for continuity across the planet. And so plans were set up. I mean, you can go study all about the Bretton Woods agreements and all the things that happened from that. But anyway, in 1945, there was a commission set up, and it has a long title. I can't hardly say the whole thing, but anyway, it was constituted of the United States, the United Kingdom, and France as to be the overseers of the reconstruction and the system to bring the world back.
I'm sorry, Winston, I just need to interrupt. This is live, and we're losing your lighting. I don't know if there's a light you could put on, but we're losing a little light.
If you're giving me a second here, maybe I can. Hold on.
Sure. I'll go over to, let me go over to John Otrin and Martin, our other guests, and see if you have, did you guys have anything you wanted to add to what Winston's saying, or did you have any questions? Let me start with John.
Well, Winston is pretty much on it. I mean, what he is saying is very, very accurate. And I've been listening and studying with him. I think the encapsulation of what he was talking about, I think you're going to be able to replay this a couple of times and actually understand a little bit more about our system of finance. There's, like he's talking about, the money of exchange and the money of account. Money of exchange is actual, like trading of beads. You know, you trade, an Indian would trade, say, some beads for an arrow. That's actually, it's an apple for an orange. And money of account, it's all double bookkeeping, and it's actually pushing off. It's actually a debt cannot be paid to another debt. I mean, he really capsulized it well. You might ask.
And you studied with him for like many, many years. You've been to his seminars, and did you want to just comment on how helpful they are?
Every time that I would go to one of the seminars, I would find something new. For example, the word "of" in the English dictionary has two meanings. The word "of" can mean with or without. So when you say the Declaration of Independence, you could be saying the Declaration without independence. The English language has a lot of double meanings. For example, the all capital name. If everybody takes a look at their driver's license, there's your all capital name can either be a vessel, it can be a corporation, or it can be a tombstone. So most people aren't aware of what's really out there. There's so many things that we just don't really look at. We see, but we don't really see.
I see. Right. So let me ask Martin. Thanks, John. And let me go over to Martin for a minute and see if Martin wanted to comment on anything so far that Winston said, or if you had any questions.
Well, it's not really a question, but I want to make a comment on what he's talked about, the contract that we have spiritually. Okay. And that goes back to, in what I've been studying under trust, the trust arrangement. An arrangement is in trust where a contract is in commerce. Okay? And when I listen to Winston, I understand what he's saying about the issues we have is we're not reading the contracts or studying the contracts or understanding the arrangements or agreements that we're getting into when we do the actions that we take. So then when something, like he said, most of the time that happens is someone breaches these contracts. So
right, that's unfortunately where we end up when in the courtroom.
Well, and think about it. So if this is the case, then the action being taken by a party can be then with a counterclaim of breach of contract.
Breach of contract, I see. So
Again, if you have a license, you get a license for something, you are now coming into an agreement between two parties, establishing a license. And then when someone then wants to break that contract by separating that agreement, right? And it's really interesting if you think about it. We do jump into things before, put the cart before the horse by jumping into things without thinking about the contract that we initially got into before we're now into court.
Well, let me just jump in here, because I think the one thing our audience can relate to is this concept of contract. By, let's just use marriage, for example. Winston, how many people jump into marriage without realizing really what the legal contract says about the marriage itself? Because it seems like you get married and you make this contract, for better, for worse, for sickness in sickness and in death, till death in health, until death do us part. And then what happens to that contract?
Well, in our modern society, under the system we have, most people don't realize they're getting into a three-party contract. And that is the husband, wife, and state. And the result of that contract is what's known as issue. And the operation in that contract is known as what's that word? I'll think of it in a minute. But in any event, the contract starts with the application. And anytime you see the word application, you think the word benefit privilege. And the word benefit privilege is a taxable thing. And so the tax then on the contract, on the application, is actually the children, because the operation of that contract is, now get this straight, I'm not being silly here, it's called sexual commerce. And the result of that sexual commerce is the issue which the state claims as a tax on the benefit privilege of the license. Now, a license, of course, is defined as permission from the state to do something which is either illegal, immoral, or unlawful. All right? And so they put you into an unlawful situation right from the start. If you want to trace back the reasons of why we marry and we carry on like we do in this regard, if you trace back historically, it all relates to land. It all relates to land. And we as people come up out of the land, we come up out of the dirt. And so we're simply just walking and talking real estate. That's what we are. And so if you go back and kind of try to conceptualize some of these concepts here in regards to our modern system of marriage, then it'll start to make a little bit of sense. Do you have any questions on that?
I do. And I think what's interesting is how the three-party contract, that kind of blew me away because I didn't realize that. I don't think anybody realized that. I don't know who realizes that, because we don't realize, I think, when we have children, what happens? So you're saying that does the children become the tax or something? I'm not quite sure I understand.
The children are the tax on the contract. It's the issue. The issue that comes from a sexual commerce that is licensed by the state.
So, okay.
That's why the government, so forth, highly discourages an issue that comes from a non-marriage.
I see. So what happens? So you have this contract, and then you have children, then you get a birth certificate, and then what happens?
What do you mean what happens?
With the birth certificate, that child becomes, there's two things I think that happen there that I maybe try to get a little understanding about. The child becomes immediately commoditized. Is that correct? Based on the potential earnings?
No, not okay. Look, You know, that would be a long discussion, but let me encapsulate it real quickly.
Okay.
You'll have to conceptualize of the word original issue. And if you go back in your scriptures, when Jesus himself was asked about tax, what did he say? He said, well, who's taxed? The foreigners or the children? Now, the child, when it's first born, is called original issue. It has come from Creator, and it has no liens or liabilities attached. However, because of the what's called the doctrine of parens patriae, the state claims to be the father of the nation or the father of the people and so forth. And in that respect, they have the duty or obligation to provide for that child. And they do. And again, this is going to be a long conversation. It would really take, longer to get into it. But basically what happens, the state does provide for that child. And so once the application for the live birth is sent through the commercial system, the child is given an exemption from taxation because, again, they are original issue. Now, that has nothing to do with the birth certificate. It has to do with the application for live birth.
So is that the application for the birth certificate you're saying?
No. For birth certificate.
Okay, I'm confusing the two.
Apples and oranges.
Okay.
I'll get into the birth certificate.
Okay.
Now we're just talking about the original issue and the application to the government for the registration for the exemption from taxation, going right on what Jesus said.
Okay.
All right? That system is correct. And in consequence of that, the process of the application ends up with a private insurance bonding company, which is known as the depository trust company. And based upon that application, then they create bonds, which are a guarantee for the debt that would be created by that entity. And so they're holding somewhere around $35 billion in bonds for each for each application or for each original issue that comes to their attention. Now, okay, that's one system. All right. Now, because of the desire, if I can use that word, of the federal government, or what we call the shadow government, to control the original issue, they try to get them into a consensual contract so that the federal government can use the exemption. Understand, the federal government is a corporation.
Right.
They do not have an exemption from taxation. They are a taxable entity. All right, so they would prefer not to. And in consequence of that, they have tried to seize the exemption of the original issue, the children. For us, I used to be a child. But in order to do that, what they did was they created something known as a birth certificate. Now, the birth certificate is the introduction of the fiction. That previous system that I showed you, or I just discussed, deals with reality, but the government wants to turn the thing into a fiction so they can take control. So they created a fiction. What they did, they took the name of the original issue and they capitalized it. In other words, they wrote the name in all capital letters. And if you look in the government styles manual, it'll tell you that anything written in all capital letters is either, number one, a U.S. vessel, a corporation, or a dead person. So the all capital letter entity there it's all three actually, but they're certainly calling it a dead person. And if you look in your Internal Revenue Code, it will always refer to the party as a decedent. So the IRS is dealing with dead people. All right, now, How did they get the individual obligated to that fiction? And it was through what's called the Social Security Form 5, SS5 form. And they enticed us to sign that document under the guise that if you don't sign this document and get a number, you cannot do commerce, which goes right along with the book of Revelations that a lot of people point to. You can't do business without the number of the beast. Okay, there we go. So we were enticed by fraud to sign that document, and in consequence of that, we were construed by the federal government as the trustee surety for the all capital letter name as it appears on the birth certificate, and there's where the problems come from.
Okay, now that changes status, though. Is that what you're saying, that there's like a change in status here?
Not so much a change in status. First off, the all capital letter name was created by the state, in my case, the state of Kentucky. The registrar did it. They created that birth certificate. Now, if I had never signed the SS5 form, that birth certificate would have sat there through all eternities with no effect. But because I did sign the SS5 form, that obligated me to that legal fiction, which is a decedent, and the federal government only deals with dead people. It does not deal with real men. And so, again, you know, when we first started our little conversation a while ago, we were talking about certain things that we had done on the private side, okay? And we did that as real people. But now when you start to deal in the public with the all capital letter names and so forth, you're dealing with the fiction. And now here's the rub, and here's where people really get mixed up. Let me just explain it to you. When you're in the public, the remedy for any public debt is public money. Public money. And that's in the form of negotiable instruments. Now, what the system, or what and they're using the courts to do this, and the IRS, and they're doing it all by trickery and sleight of hands. What they're doing is saying, okay, you owe us, or you have a judgment against you for, let's say, $1,000. You think that that's going to be private money. Now, when I talk about private money, I'm talking about any form of money which you have, in fact, inserted your energy into. In other words, you go out and earn it. Okay, so that's private money, whatever form it comes in. If it's in Federal Reserve notes or whatever, it doesn't make any difference because you have inserted energy into it. Now, on the public side, there is not any energy in that public money. And what the government, what the IRS, what the courts, and all these other entities try to do is play upon the people's ignorance. Because the people don't know the different forms of money. And so when you're dealing in the public, you should be dealing with public money. And when you're operating on the private, you should be operating with private money that has equity attached. Does that help?
It does help. And I think what you're saying is really enlightening a lot of people. I know that I'm learning a lot just listening to you. But what I'm trying to figure out is we're talking about legal fiction. I think this concept of legal fiction is going to really surprise people. Like, they're going to say, what does this mean? And John, you're smiling. Do you have a question? I want to bring in the panel and see if Martin or John has a question or some clarification for Winston at this point.
I think Winston was very clear. I was, like I said, it's a concept that when I first started studying with Winston, it's so hard to believe because you never learned this in school. And going to college and getting a degree in math and physics and a minor in history and German, I never came across this until I started really looking at what's really out there. And Winston, it's very enlightening. And there's a lot there that most people aren't even aware of. I mean, he just hit the surface. I mean, it really goes into deep. I mean, I mean, if Winston was to just go and tell you about the Wizard of Oz, the movie,
Yeah.
shows everything that's out there. I mean,
Right. No, that's a very good point. And so you're saying that the shadow, Winston was talking about the shadow government and that there's trickery. And what I just read about recently is that all of the major big super PACs, the big political action committees, are starting to form their own new court system. So that they're trying to form this, they're starting this movement where they're starting to form these new courts so that they can supersede the courts that are existing right now. So it's, continues. The trickery that you're referring to continues. And so you're saying that we're dealing with private and public. It almost looks like debit and credit. There's always like this duality to what we're talking about. What the idea of private versus public, so we have two gentlemen here who are private Americans. Can you give us an understanding as to why we're all not private Americans just naturally?
Who are you asking?
I'm sorry, Winston, I'm asking you.
Okay. Well, let me make a comment on fictions. I'm very much in favor of them. Now, that might sound backwards, but when you get into what's called the common law and so forth, first off, common law is based entirely on usage, history, precedents, and all those kind of things. And certainly the common law varies from country to country. But when the common law comes upon a situation that does not have a solution in the common law, then they create a fiction. Now, this kind of tends toward the concept of equity. Equity looks to the future, common law looks to the past. And so when the common law comes upon something which they do not have a solution for from the past, then they have to create a fiction and operate that fiction until the problem is resolved, and then they get rid of the fiction. Now, the problem has been in our country and in most of the world that to deal with the money situation, and and I'm not opposed to. Get me straight. I am not opposed to the system that was created. Not at all. I mean, way back when, we only had maybe 1 billion people on the planet, but now all of a sudden we got 8 billion people. There's not enough gold and silver to use, and so we had to go to negotiable instruments, and I'm not opposed to that. But again, we're operating in the fiction. The only thing that I disagree with is that the people should be educated in how that system works. And so that's what I've attempted to do, and many others. That's what I've attempted to do as Solutions in Commerce, is to educate people as to the true nature so that they can operate within the system correctly.
So it seems quite unfair.
It's got to stop.
Yeah, it seems quite unfair that we should not be educated in the system that we are under the jurisdiction of. But there's different jurisdictions, though. I mean, you mentioned the word before. You mentioned the word equity. What is equity in the way you were referring to it when you say equity looks to the future, common law looks to the past?
Well, let me give you this example. If you're sitting out on your front porch one day and you notice your neighbor is, pull up with several trucks and they're unloading box after box of dynamite and putting it in their garage. Okay? Under the common law, nothing can be done about that until he does an overt act. But you think that's dangerous. So equity at that point would come in and say, okay, the prospect or the probability is that stockpiling tons of TNT in your garage is dangerous to the community, so we'll act upon that principle. See? So again, common law looks to the past, equity looks to the future of what might happen if a certain situation were allowed to continue. So you have that joinder at that point of common sense, common law, and the prospects that something might in fact go wrong, because that's obviously a dangerous situation. So that's how you kind of get the comparison between common law and equity.
I see. And let me just ask Martin if he wants to jump in at this. Do you have a question?
Well, it's interesting he would say that, because now you're talking about a financial system that you can see into the future, and that it's going to collapse at one point or another. So isn't there any way of directing some entity to correct that system so it doesn't collapse in equity?
Yes.
See, and that's an interesting point that he said, because he said it looks into the future. And we know that this financial system cannot sustain the way it is. It's going to collapse again. It's going to create a lot of harm to a lot of people. And so there needs to be, in my opinion, is some sort of an action taken that corrects that system so that it won't cause harm. And
Okay.
it's evident. We've seen it how many times so far? We've seen the Great Depression. We've seen the 2008 where it collapsed and caused all kinds of harm. They're saying it's going to happen again. We already know it. So what do we do? How do we alert the proper party, or who is the proper party to alert that this is not an equitable system that we're in?
Interesting point. Very interesting. Right. So looking at equity law, shouldn't there be something under equity then, looking to the future, saying, wait, something's imminent, we need to remedy this? Winston, what do you think? You're saying, yes, there is something. And
that's exactly the impact that we had when we did those liens against the Federal Reserve banks and the domino effect that happened. The big problem on the planet was not particularly the Federal Reserve notes, but the big problem on the planet was the improper use of them. The United States, to this point, is the only country that does not have its own national currency. We're totally operating with what's called US dollar or Federal Reserve notes, which are being improperly used. And so the remedy in equity then is to what? Get rid of the Federal Reserve notes and reinstitute a national currency, which is in place even as we speak. Some of those who are well versed in this will know this. And that is, we have a new money, which is a Treasury Reserve notes, which has been trading on the European markets for, 6 or 8 months, and on the Japanese market. Well, that's government money. That is the money of the new republic, which is being instituted by the U.S. military. And the money on the street that we'll be using will be called United States notes, just like what President Kennedy did way back in '63. So these things have been provided for, are being provided for, even as we speak. And so, but let me help you to understand this. And I keep hearing these terms, gold-backed currency. Okay, now what does that mean? That means that it's the same system. We have the gold as the surety, for that currency. But is that paper negotiable instrument you're walking around with redeemable in gold? And the answer is no. You can't take any new money, I don't care what country you're in, and get gold or other precious things in redemption of that currency. So we're still using the exact same system of negotiable instruments. For crying out loud, we got 8 billion people on the planet.
right.
We have to use that system as an interim step, might I add, toward a cashless society as we toward the stars.
Well, Winston, you just, that's far out, because I didn't really expect you to go there.
I'm sorry.
No, it's wonderful. But that's great. So we're looking to the future as a cashless society. But I don't know if you can comment on this, but Karen Hudes had come out recently and announced that we were going to have a new type of currency for the United States. She had a name for it. I don't recall the name. But when I tried to interview her, when I tried to invite her on the GoldFish Report, she hung up on me. So she wasn't interested in having this conversation.
Yeah.
So can you confirm whether is there anything accurate about that statement, that so the fiat dollar is going to, the plans are in the works right now that we're going to get a new currency? That's what you're saying for the United States?
Yeah, this is a part of the program where they're working to revalue or the RV, everybody calls it.
Yeah,
anyway, of a nation's currency based upon several factors such as gross national product, assets, in-ground minerals, trees, water, whatever. See, this is the problem that Keith and I were addressing with the problem with the central banks. And that was the central banks were in fact in control of the nation's currency. That's exactly backwards. The currency should be in control of the nation's treasury. And once you get the central banks out of control, the treasury can act properly. And so this whole process of revaluation of a nation's currency were to tie the currency directly to the asset of the country and give it a rating based upon that country's real value. And that's what the RV was about. A lot of people, worried about all these dinars and zings and dongs and all that kind of stuff. That's secondary. The problem that was trying to be evaluated was to get the control of the central banks out of the picture and get the control back into the national treasury. Now, that's what we did with the Federal Reserve banks when they could not recharter. Then they came under the control of the United States Treasury, which in essence wasn't much better than the Federal Reserve, but we're trying to get that corrected with this new interim government. But in any event, getting control of a nation's currency is so imperative to a country, and that way they cannot be stolen from. Inflation, deflation, and all the crazy things that these central banks were doing simply so they could manipulate and take and rob the country. That's all they've ever done. That's all the central banks have ever done. We don't need central banks. Even Bernanke himself got up and said that. I mean, they had practically, put a gun to his head to get him to admit it. But Bernanke got right up and said, no, we don't need a central bank. Never have needed a central bank. And so those things are not necessary.
Well, Winston, we're in so much debt, though, the United States.
Concept.
Well, it's a concept. Well, I mean, the ticker's ticking. It's ticking. It's calculating.
In debt to who? In debt to who?
Good question. Steve joined us. Hi, Steve. Glad
Hi.
Let me address that. When you start talking about national debt, are you talking about the principal of the debt, or are you talking about the interest? Because those are two separate things. Under our double entry bookkeeping system, interest accrues to the principal. Now, who's the principal? Well, you are. I am. And so that interest is being stolen by, or was being stolen by, the Federal Reserve Bank when that interest should have come back to the people. And that's how they've been stealing. That's how the central bank has been stealing successfully from the people over these last 70 or 80 years. Now, let's address the principle of what's called the national debt. First off, it's not a national debt. It's a federal debt. The United States Incorporated is the one that borrowed whatever and created the principle, which I'm not sure how much it is. Some say 8 trillion, some say it's more like 16 trillion, whatever it is. There's no consequence, because what happens is that people, for instance, they get taxed on this or that, or the IRS comes and gets money from all that kind of stuff. All of that money, in whatever form, is applied to the interest, which is a Ponzi scheme, which can never be paid anyway. Go study your history, the Bank of England, all the things they've done. But in any event, very seldom does anyone address the principle. Now, we have paid down on the principle. I mean, there's a technique we've used in years past. For instance, probably about within the last year and a half, I have effected payment on the principal of about 1.3 trillion. All right. So when I do things, I'm pushing to pay down the principal, and I could care less about the interest.
Isn't it true that there is no interest in circulation, so there's nowhere to pay interest on anything?
Well, you're getting into a cyclic logic there, using the words. Well, first off, what's called the interest on the national debt is generated by the use of Federal Reserve notes. And by the way, Federal Reserve notes are not notes. They are perpetual annuity bonds. And so we're using perpetual annuity bonds as our form of currency, and that's what's causing the interest and the problems. That's why it's impossible to pay the interest on that federal debt, because because of the nature of the beast. That's why I focus not on the interest, but I focus on the principle, when I do certain operations. People ask me, Winston, couldn't you just pay off the whole national debt? And in my mind, I'm saying principle, and I'm saying, yes, I could, but it would cause such turmoil that I would not want to do that. And so from time to time we do. For instance, back in, I think it was 2002, there were a lot of us using this particular process, and it was found out that we had actually paid down the principal about $400 billion. And somebody asked me, Winston, how do you know that worked? I said, watch the prime rate. And sure enough, the prime rate dropped a whole quarter of a point just on $400 billion. And so, I do know these things work. Would I upset the apple cart? I could over a period of time actually pay off the whole principal, but what would happen? And so I'm just one guy. I'm not the guy in control of anything, and I'm not going to create turmoil in the system. The system has to be operated fluidly for the benefit of all, and those who are in charge, those at the top. And I'm not at the top. I'm just a regular guy who knows it's a little bit, but the people at the top are making the corrections. And when those corrections are in place, then the Federal Reserve note will be completely gotten rid of. And those who are holding Federal Reserve notes will be able to redeem those probably close to par with the new currency that's coming out. And then where does that debt go? Where does that supposed national debt go? Well, the corporation that created it follows them, and that corporation is presently in receivership. So let the trustee and the receiver work it out. At that point, I'll stop worrying about it. I won't care anymore, because it's not having a direct impact upon the people in the country.
Okay, so you're trying to really promote the education so people are aware of this. Steve, did you have a question, Steve?
Yes, I'm sorry, I've just been able to come in just now. And if I'm asking a question that may have been answered already.
Sorry.
Obviously, we've all been living worldwide under a huge monetary scam, just to put it short. And the scam, from what I'm gathering, is coming to an end, and there's going to be some sort of reset. So, Winston, may I ask you, how would you see an equitable system emerge from the ashes of this reset? How would it look to you?
I think it would. Now, let's talk about the system. And perhaps you missed my discussion about the formulation plan of the experts and how the system was set up and how it was improperly used. Mm-hmm. Let me refer back to 1945, when the royal families, including the Red Dragons, ambassador, mm-hmm. and so forth, got together and decided, what we need to do to help rebuild the world is to set up this commission. And they gave the United States, United Kingdom, and France a 50-year commission. Mm-hmm. And that, and pardon my grammar, but that's like putting the fox in the hen house. I mean, for crying out loud, the United States, United Kingdom, and France to run the rebuilding of the planet, all they did was steal the money. And so that ran for 50 years, and I think they should have disallowed it a long time before that. But eventually in 1995, the powers that be, the royal families, the dragon families, and so forth, created an entity known as the International Treasury Control, and gave the sole responsibility to a gentleman who is actually Cambodian royalty that goes by the name, this is not his real name, but he goes by the name of Dr. Ray C. Dam. And when he was given that responsibility in 1995, he went to work to try to correct the problems and so forth that had been instituted. The only problem was he did not have a lot of police power. And so, in consequence of that, he had to rely upon the United States Congress and various offices within the Congress to effectuate the corrections that he was discovering and trying to correct. So that was started in 1995. He developed something known as the Office of International Treasury Control, and he is the sole heir. I'm not talking about M1 here. I mean, that's a different concept. I'm talking about the sole heir of the collateral accounts and the controller of the global debt facility. Now, the collateral accounts are, in fact, the surety for all of the world's currencies. And all these debts that are incurred legally have to be turned back to the global debt facility, Treasury Direct. However, those debts are not being turned back in properly. For instance, they're being I'm trying to think the right word. They're being cut off, for instance, by the United States Treasury, by the big banks in some of the countries and so forth. But all of that return, it should go Treasury directly to the global debt facility to be dealt with there. For instance, when a bank here in our country lets out a mortgage, they create new money. Okay, that's money that never existed before, and that money is created by your signature on a promissory note. Now, that money is legally the money of the U.S. Treasury, but the banks are withholding that money from the Treasury, and they're keeping it, and they're collateralizing on it, and that's what's caused the problem. That's what caused the bubble in 2008, along with other atrocities that have occurred since that time. And so there's the problem. The system is not the problem, it's the breakdown of the system. And so when Dr. Dam took control of the total situation, then he was going and trying to work out some of these problems, and then he got a lot of opposition for it. Like I say, he didn't have police power to go and arrest somebody and put them in jail. He could simply recommend to the U.S. Congress and certain agencies within that they go and put an end to it. Sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. And so he was basically handcuffed in many instances in what he was able to do. So in 2010, I had gone to Cambodia to meet with him. We were trying to fund some humanitarian projects, which he agreed to do as far as he was able. And so in any event, with my meeting with him and with Keith Scott as the chief of the cabinet and as many of the cabinet members as were available at that time, we held various meetings. Dr. Dam showed me certain things, certain documents up to a certain security level. He said, I can't show you anything else because simply you're not cleared for it. And I said, that's not a problem. You know, what you show me here certainly convinces me that you are who you say you are. And in consequence of that, he did, in fact, give me a certain official appointment. He said, I want you to be our representative in the United States. And I said, what do you want me to do? And he said, first off, I want you to clean up this mortgage thing. He said, this is an embarrassment to the OITC because we are underwriting all the mortgage banks. He said, this is an embarrassment. So he wanted me to come work on that. So immediately when I got back, I did go to work on that. Our first attempt at it was we got into a trading program with HSBC Hong Kong on some instruments that I wrote. And a consequence of that, we should have had enough funds to effect the plan that we had because we had, in fact, contacted all the secondary mortgage holders, all the secondary mortgage paper holders who were willing to give up their paper for 25 or 30 cents on the dollar. And so from that trade, we should have been able to purchase all of the secondary mortgage paper, come back to the homeowner with a new contract. Basically, you know, how much equity you have in it, we'll contract for the remainder at no interest. And so we could have resolved the foreclosures and all these other problems, with the exception that HSBC Hong Kong refused to pay off on the trade. And we know the trade went through because the United Nations got 76 trillion of it. And our part should have been about 150 trillion, which we were going to use to effect this mortgage resolution. So after that failed, we got in touch with another trader. He made certain promises. He fell through. He lied. And then we got into dealing with Marcos and a whole bunch of stuff in this respect. But eventually, because of my failure or our failure to produce the funds that would have corrected the mortgage foreclosure problem, I simply went back to education, devising various techniques that people could utilize to perhaps help themselves and so forth. Sometimes they work pretty good, sometimes they don't. Again, a lot of it has to do with the operator, what they're actually doing. And so that's been the effort. And, I've caught a lot of flack over it. Some people think I'm an angel, some people think I'm a devil. And I guess I'm both. But in any event, those are the efforts that we've tried to make, going again with the responsibility and commission that Dr. Dam had given to me. Does that help?
Somewhat. But
Okay.
you're saying that the system can stay the same, but we just need to clean it up. That's basically what you're saying.
Correct. The system is very good, and like I say, the only reason that it's failed is because of the parties who operated incorrectly. Like I say, I don't know who had the bright idea. Maybe the ambassador does, but somebody put the United States, the United Kingdom, and France in charge of that whole thing for 50 years, and they did nothing but screw it royally.
Mm.
The system itself is very workable.
Does the ambassador want to comment on that? Is the ambassador with us, or is he on call? He's with us. Martin, we'll wait for the ambassador. Oh, here.
No, I am. I just had to unmute myself. No, basically, I believe that the decision of putting certain people in power was not very wise. And as we all know, at the 2012 meeting that was held during the summer, the mandate of that expired. Okay, so basically now at this point of time, the new system that is being moderated do not include this particular entities in the way that they used to be in the past, and that's why we're seeing all these new institutions also coming up to the surface. But of course, the beast will not let go that easy, and so this is a struggle. I would like to speak with Winston at a later time a little bit more about Mr. Dam and what's going on there. But at the same time, we believe that putting this new era with the new people in power that's coming, hopefully will, be more in the way that it will benefit, all nations and not just certain nations. Because if you look at the, the project of rebuilding Europe was also having other points to rebuild other parts of the world. But like Winston said, it just went to rebuild Europe and went basically straight into the pockets of the Western world, and the rest of the world was forgotten in this, treatise that was signed. And that's a very sad situation. But I believe and hope that together we're going to be able to change that into the future.
Okay, well, I know that Martin had his mark up there. Martin, did you have a question for Winston?
Well, I'm going to make a comment, then I'm going to ask a question. Isn't it true it has to be done individually? I mean, it has to. We all have to individually take care of our own situation in order. There's a comment that's been made to me, and I agree that in order to make the world better, you must make your own world better. And so, let me throw something at you that's very interesting. Are you familiar with sweat equity claims, right?
Say that again, please.
You're familiar with sweat equity claims, right?
I suppose that I am.
Can you explain a sweat equity claim?
Well, why don't you explain it and see if I understand what you're talking about?
Well, okay. Sweat equity is when you're expounding energy, right? There's a fact that you should be compensated for that energy that you're utilizing. Let's use it for a homeowner, for instance. according to the deed, they're supposed to be a tenant on the land. Well, that doesn't mean they're the owners. That means they're the tenant, right? So if they're the tenant, and so they are the housekeeper, they're the security guard, they're the landscaper, they're the all the different energy that you expound taking care of this piece of land, but you're actually the tenant for. Isn't it possible to put a sweat equity claim in, claiming that you should be compensated under equity for your energy that you are espousing upon something that doesn't belong to you?
Okay, so you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that. You know, a lot of people call me crazy, but it's not true. Well, yeah, it is some. But in any event, if you have what you're calling sweat equity investment in real estate, the easiest way to express that, in my opinion, is simply to go put a mechanic lien on the property and foreclose on the property and sell the title, register the title, so forth. And now you have the newest title. And then if you want to get into some kind of a quiet title action as a prove up on who has the best title, then probably yours would prevail if you know how to operate in civil court. So yeah, you can redeem equity in property. There's some other ways which I won't mention on the air because people go crazy with this stuff, get themselves into trouble. But in any event, yeah, you can go foreclose on your own property anytime you want to based on your sweat equity claim, as you say here.
All right, now let's go back to what you said earlier. We are all dirt. We are all land. We are all considered to be property, correct?
Yeah.
So then why is it that we don't, as an energy source inside the vessel, claim a sweat equity claim and then put that into a private trust as trust res, creating a value that we will have the ability then to operate in commerce with the ability then to use conversion from a trust title to a negotiable instrument to get rid of all these conflicts of, you say they're concepts of debt. Then everyone would have the ability to have an equitable claim in the universe that was given to them by their creator in the beginning.
Okay, there's certain barriers you're going to have to break down in order to make that happen. Number one, you have to come out from under the fiction. You have to stop being a United States citizen and have to exert yourself as an American national. Now, we do have the technology to do that. That's the last production actually I've done is what's known as, well, actually there's two processes, one on the public and one on the private. On the public side, you would do an assignment of reversionary interest back to the international through the Secretary of the United States Department of Treasury. And then number two, you would create an ownership document through an authentication process, as we've shown, and demonstrate that you hold paramount ownership of your body, and then stop acting as a United States citizen and start acting as a real man or woman. And so you, in essence, what you're doing then is you're overcoming the fiction by taking things back on the private side. So to answer your question, yes, you can do those things, but you have to be very careful of your status when you do that, because if you try to do it as a public entity, it will cause you no end of problems. You have to get on the private side and operate what you're saying, you know, from the private side, and I think you'll have the success you're looking for.
Now, you mentioned the Styles Manual earlier, correct? You said that they had the Styles Manual. They had 3 different definitions for the vessel. But under the Styles Manual, it also mentions that an inhabitant of the United States is an American, not a national, an American inside the Styles Manual.
Okay, remember that's a government publication. And so regardless of whatever, you know, this is one of the things that we do incessantly with one another, is we banter with words.
Yep, semantics.
Yeah, semantics. And most of the people that are listening to this have no idea about the words that you and I are bantering back and forth. So rather than banter words, let's talk about what, the proof is in the doing, not in the words and so forth, because words are things that the lawyers just love to twist around. The government officials come out with new definitions of words every year. Every year they revise the legal word and all these kind of stuff. And so, rather than banter about words, let's talk about how we operate and what we do. And so whether we call it American and national, inhabitant, decedent, or whatever we're talking about here, let's talk about what it is that we actually do. One of my ways of life is that I never create debt. I just don't do it. To me, debt's a 4-letter word. And so the genesis of the mortgage problem in the country is who? It's not the banks. It's the people. The people are the ones who cause this. If the banks could sit there forever, and if no one ever come in for a mortgage, they'd still be sitting there forever, so on and so forth. What would happen to the houses? Well, we have ways of dealing with that too. That's a kind of extensive and perhaps in some instances a dangerous technology. I read a book. I just reread it the other day. It's a book called Shantaram. It's an interesting book. But anyway, one of the comments of philosophy, that was given by one of the characters in that book said, what if everyone on the planet did the same thing? What effect would that have? And so going along with that, if no one went to the bank and took out a mortgage on the property, would we have a mortgage problem? The answer is no, we would not. And so would you have a place to live? Yes, you would have a place to live. Could you rent a place? Yeah, you could rent a place. You could, but anyway, there's ways to resolve these problems without continually creating more and more debt. It's kind of interesting. I listened to an interview one time with one of the chief directors or one of the higher ups in the Internal Revenue Service, and the interviewer simply asked the question, if tomorrow no one paid any taxes, what would happen to the IRS? Now, listen to what the guy said. He said, well, I guess we would be out of business. I listened to that and thought about it for a long time. So when we start pointing fingers, we point fingers out here at all these different, point your finger right here. Point the finger at me. Point the finger at you, because we're the cause of the problem. The people are the cause of the problem. And if the people were educated properly so that they understood what the correct methods, principles, and so forth to operate were, would we have the problems? And the answer is no. The people are the problem, not the government, not the banks, not all this other stuff. We're the problem. And so, my design and what I've tried to do over the years is to educate as many as I possibly could, as far as they're able to receive it. Not everybody's on the same level, but to enlighten people so that they, don't make the same mistakes. We laugh about the definition of insanity, where we say that, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result.
Winston, do you find that people are receptive to your information?
Yes.
Yes. They are receptive.
Yeah. Well, generally when I teach, first off, let me preface this comment was that I'm here on this planet under contract. I've never been on the planet before. I mean, I've operated in other dimensions, fifth, seventh, all these kind of things. And so generally when I teach, I'm teaching at several levels. And John will tell you this, and that is people receive the information at their level, and as they progress, they can listen to the same message and they can hear something entirely different. So when I do lectures and teachings and all those kind of things, I'm teaching at least at the fifth or perhaps even sixth dimension. People hear it at whatever level they're at, and then as they continue, they can move on up. So that's pretty much how I do things.
That's very interesting because I'm processing this just in the same way that you explained that, Winston. Because a lot of it's way over my head, but some of it I'm following you, and some I still have lots of questions. I hope that you'll come and join us again. I know we're just kind of scratching the surface of these so many different complicated topics, and I hope that you will come and join us again. We're getting close to the end, and I want to go through and ask everybody. I know Radagast, before we start our closing comments and stuff, I know Radagast had a question or a comment. Want to go, Radagast?
Yes, thank you. Winston, I heard the word, I think you used it twice, interim government. Can you speak a little bit more about the interim government?
Yeah, I think if you go and listen to Drake brought this up, way back. He had information on that in I think he said 75. Drake and I are about the same age, so I remember all those times of Vietnam. I got drafted like everybody else. But in any event, probably 7 or 8 years ago, one of my CIA contacts informed me that the U.S. Army had created a fully functional republic form government. He told me they were stationed in West Virginia. And so the question got to be, well, okay, they got the thing, set up. Why don't they come forth? And so apparently at this time, they are coming forth. I had originally thought that General Carter Ham was going to be the president. Apparently now it's General Dunford. And as I understand it, they are in complete control. The United States Incorporated, what we call the federal government, has been in receivership now for probably well over a year. And so what they're, more than anything else, I think they're trying to attain a smooth transition from one phase to the next phase, if I could use that term. And so do I know that for a fact? No, I do not. But all the information that I do have indicates that. I do know, because I was informed by someone who participated in it, that in order to comply with Basel III for the new currency, that some of the Chinese elders leased 100 billion in gold to this new entity. Also gave them a sizable amount of cash with which to operate so they can function properly. And that was given to them, I think, last spring. Well, there's a lot of stuff, that I do know about that probably wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to a lot of people. But in regards to your question, I have full faith and confidence that this is the fact.
Okay, so
Would that be,
go ahead, Ray.
Would that, like sometimes in Benjamin Fulford's reports, he refers to Pentagon white hats. Would they have any kind of relationship from government and the Pentagon white hats?
Yes, I'll trace this all the way back to 1959-60 when Valiant Thor spent 2.5 years in the Pentagon. What do you think he was spending 2.5 years there for? Yeah, I think he was establishing the ground floor, what you call white hats in the Pentagon, and now I believe that they're coming to the front. Major General Dunford may, in fact, be one of those. I can't say for a fact, but we do. Too bad I don't have time to tell more about this, but we do have a lot of what we would call aliens who look just like us, who are operating on this planet. I've been doing business and had an interaction with a man who is a Pleiadian. He's not a human, but he looks just like everybody else, and he walks among us just like everybody else does. So I know that there are a lot of them here, and I would have to suspect that that Valiant Thor started to insert many of those types directly into the functioning, and over the years certainly they've moved up in command and so forth. And so I think the white hats may have been started way back in the early 60s by Valiant Thor. That's my opinion. That's my opinion.
Wow, just when we're starting to get to the really far out stuff, Winston, we're talking about ETs now. So this is getting, who knows where this conversation was going, but we talk about this on the GoldFish report. I mean, James Gilland, and we haven't had James on yet, but people who have presented at James's Ranch, we've had Randy Kramer on, we've had Simon Parks on. So we've had people, we have broached this topic, and, this might sound shocking to a lot of our viewers who, might not realize who Valiant Thor was, and what his role was here. So thanks, Red, I guess, for that question, because that kind of gave us a good segue into this to kind of maybe just touch on as we close up, because why are they here? And you say you've been dealing with them. You're talking about extraterrestrials who look human. And what do you know that's different about them?
Well, they have a different internal anatomy and so forth. For instance, this particular one, when he goes to sleep, his heart stops and he has no blood pressure. Now that's interesting. And other things. I've seen him do some interesting things, not miracles or magic or anything like that, but he heals very quickly. Boy, can he ever. And then a lot of things like that. I was sitting with him in a restaurant. Actually, we was just sitting in Denny's one day talking, and I asked him, are there any more like you on the planet? Oh, he said, yeah, there's lots of us here. I said, are there any in this restaurant? He looked around and said, yeah, there's 3 more in here. And I said, will you point them out to me? He said, no, because of course, he couldn't, violate their privacy. But just sitting there in Denny's on a given day, obviously there were 4 there who were not humans. Now, what does that mean in the full scope? I don't know what the others are doing. I know what he's doing. He's managed to collect the land patent on, at this point, 44 of the states, including the place where Washington, D.C. sits. And he's working with the natives. And so he has gotten the land patent on those. He's working with the, matter of fact, I was just on a conference call with him and one of the native chiefs from Alaska and Anna von Ritz. And we were discussing some of the things that have been implicated from this huge $279 trillion lien. And so the conversation I was having with her, especially, was how to use that lien to a good effect. And so there is these interconnections, and we're not alone. We're not alone on the planet. Now, I am a normal Earth man. That's what I am. I'm not anything different than anybody else maybe in this conversation. But there are a lot among us who are here particularly to correct some of these problems, and they work in whatever response. Valiant Thor is still here, by the way. He never left. Valiant Thor is one of the Elohim, and he's a very high-dimensional entity. But he never left. He's still here. And what he does, I can't say. If you go on the internet and listen to Dr. Frank Strange's, some of the interviews he did, they're on YouTube and so forth, you can learn a great deal about Valiant Thor and some of the things he did. And also Rob Potter, who I'm sure you're familiar with. Rob has a great deal of connection, had a great deal of connection with Dr. Frank, and then also with Valiant Thor. He can probably answer questions about that better than I can.
One question, Winston. Have you ever heard the code name Golden Violet?
No.
No, I just can confirm to the listeners that what Winston says, that we have extraterrestrials even in our government structures. And, this is on very high level, but of course, anyone talking about it will always be ridiculous. But I think one day it will be obvious. Also, one thing that Winston said that I think people need to pay attention to very much, which was one of the main messages that I had since the first time I ever talked to the people, is that actually it is the people, only the people themselves, that can change the system. And, all this escapism that we see with people, wanting to be raptured and wanting to have someone else doing it for them. You have to take responsibility yourself to do this shift and change that is necessary to do this, put this planet back in together again in the right path, And, also as we, we talk about this like a lateral accounts. With we were hearing voices like Karen Hughes and Neil Keenan. And the problem with these people is that they are hanging around with what I call keepers, people with actually no real power, and they're trying to, for a long time, trying to access or steal these funds themselves, make themselves mighty. But in reality, okay, it's only one way to do it, and that's the right way. And we're seeing that things are happening in the right way as we are speaking. And I think that people just have patience, and that people has to cooperate and kept themselves informed, because the main important goal that we have on this planet is to wage a war on ignorance. And I was watching this poor babies that has the Zika virus with the small heads, and I thought it was quite, almost like probably a hilarious joke for the people that developed this virus, that because many people who are around with a very small mind don't think about it, but now actually they have made that some entities has even, small physical heads. And I think that, it's time for us to wake up and take back both our governments and take care of control over our own lives. And I think this, interview with Winston was very, exciting and interesting. And I hope that we can have a talk again. And I hope that you people that listen to this take it into your heart and understand your own personal responsibilities in what he's talking about. So with that, also, I want to thank you, Winston, to come to this program. I hope that we'll be able to talk again more deeply about things that also cannot be shared in public. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Ambassador. And we just, want to do whatever closing comments that we have and announcements, because I know Winston, we have John here who has studied with Winston and for many years, and Winston offers courses, classes, videos, and he has a website called Solutions in Commerce. And these links are going to be posted in the description section of this video today. And we're going to ask Winston to give us more of that information. But let's first go to John. And John, for people who are out there saying, oh my goodness, I heard of this, but I didn't know that, and sitting here listening to what Winston's sharing with us, what do you tell them if they want to find, and since you've been studying with them, how's the process if you're looking to look into Winston's work? What is that like for you?
First of all, I want to say there's a few things that Winston covers, and one of them is, if you really want to be understand, you have to be a good student of the Bible. Everything is based on the Bible. That's the first thing. I mean, it's amazing how much of commerce is based on the Bible. When you talk about debt, you talk about sin, they're all related. And you start waking up, and we start realizing why when you go to church and you actually study the Bible, it has a complete connection to our whole life. The other thing is that this, what Winston was talking at the end, it was called eco-commerce, which we're talking about the future. And what, I mean, to me, it's really amazing stuff. And I mean, there's so much there that most people aren't even aware of. And it took me the longest time to realize what a straw man was, the shadow government, the corporations. And he's absolutely right. I mean, the first time that I read some of his books and lectures, I saw one thing. And then when I went back and I looked at it again, I saw something totally new. And it's because we just aren't aware of all this. I just want to say, I always look forward to going and listening to his lectures. And I feel bad when I'm too busy that I can't be there. And the last thing I want to say is, Winston, please give my best regards to Pat. And thank you for all that you do. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, John. And we're going to go to Steve. And if you have any closing comments, Steve?
No, just thank you, Winston, for being here, and keep up the good work. People need to know this. Thank you.
And thank you, Steve. And Martin, did you have any closing comments or questions?
Well, the one thing I want to point out, well, I'm glad to see Winston pointing out that we all need to point it ourselves, because when I first got really awakened to what was going on. I read a book and it had 3 words in it, and it got me to, and it said, "You need control." And so then what I realized at that point was, what is it that controls me? And what it is systems. We have all these systems that control us. And Winston's pointing out there, we have all these things that we need to learn how to operate within these systems. And the simple fact is, would you create a system that did not benefit you? Well, I know I wouldn't. So then why not learn how the systems work and make them beneficial to you, because whoever created them to make them beneficial to them. So it's up to us to take the time to learn the different systems that we are interacting with on a daily basis. And I appreciate Winston a lot, because he's taught a lot of people about commerce and how commerce works. And that's a good groundwork to then take the next step, is to get control of that system and use that system to your benefit, so then you can ascend to another greater system in your life. Thanks, Winston.
That's good. That's great, Martin. And Radagast, did you have a closing comment before I close up? I'm sure Winston's tired. And
Yes.
Going.
No, I would like to thank Winston for a really interesting talk. It just strikes me of how crucial it really is to the kind of, let's call it the nascent consciousness movement, to really start to wrap their heads around these concepts. I mean, the ambassador, as the ambassador says, it all comes down to us. The liberty and the freedom we're looking for is very much involved in knowing these systems and how to negotiate them and how to set ourselves up within the system. And I can tell that 1 or 2, watching a few videos on the internet or reading a few articles is not sufficient to the task that we have in our hands. That we really need to get in depth, and the kind of depth that you can provide.
Thanks, Radagast. I mean, Winston, you've been studying this for how many years now? I mean, after your psychology degree and your carpentry work and your military work, when did you really? How many years have you been studying this? Because you have a massive amount of information on your website. And you have videos. I know that you have all the series of videos and things that you produce. How long has this taken you?
Well, I first started studying when I was a small child in Sunday school. As John mentioned, many of our commercial practices and systems and so forth are in fact based on the King James Version of the Holy Scriptures. And so as a young child studying in Sunday school, and then as I grew up, of course, those principles, when I started studying what we call commerce, I automatically saw the parallel. And so to ask me how long I've been studying it, since I was, 5 or 6 years old, I guess.
Wow. Again, an answer I wasn't expecting to hear, but when you put it into that context, it makes perfect sense, because I think John has pointed out to me a lot about going back to the scriptures, and, we're talking about Jesus and the money exchangers and the tax and whose money, you pay Caesar give Caesar what Caesar's, and, and the whole thing. And it's really not clear why Jesus had 12 disciples and what he was doing with that. And John's taught me so much.
The truth is where you find it. And I'm not saying that, the only truth, you find is in Christianity or in King James, but in our present commercial system, that is the model that we use. Now, if the Buddhists or the Muslims were in control of the planet as far as the commerce, it would be an entirely different system based upon their scriptures, their traditions, and so forth. But it's just what we happen to have at the present, so that's what we go with.
I see. So let me get this right. So you have on your website, which is solutionsincommerce.com, is that correct?
Yeah, you could just type in WSSIC.com, which is Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce, and it'll pop up.
Okay, we're going to put these links at the bottom of the description section of this. This is going to be published as a YouTube video. We also know you have a YouTube channel now too, yourself. Okay, right. And also, so do you have any events coming up that you wanted to mention? Is there? I know you just had a cruise.
I'll be speaking at an event. It's called, it's with Ethan Fox with Awaken Aware thing. You can go on the website and get the details, for the dates and times and so forth. I think maybe James Gilliland might be speaking at the same event. So it's not just about commerce. It's about a whole gamut of things. Like I say, this whole commercial system, probably we put so much emphasis on it is because so many people have become casualties in the commercial system. And so what I try to do is bring them out of the, that mode of thinking and empower them to act for themselves. And so once they study these concepts, these principles and so forth, then at that point, they become empowered so they can be themselves. So they don't have to be under the thumb, or whatever you want to call it, of the debt system that they have participated in. And so again, if I can just put one little small crack in somebody's logic and thinking, because most of the people are under serious mind control. But if I can put one small crack in their thinking, then it can get bigger and they can come out from under that thought process. So I think we've been fairly much successful with that. We're way past the 100th monkey. We're way past that. We've infused this information into the collective consciousness. When I first started teaching, I can see the difference between then and now as far as the ability to convey information to people. That's because we have, in fact, infused at least the thought process, if not the technology, into the collective consciousness. And so now it's so much easier for people.
I see. So that's interesting what you're saying. So Winston, we just scratched the surface, and there's really so much to uncover just to get a general understanding of the fact that there's something else we need to be thinking about. I mean, the fact that we should be thinking, you used a term that the ambassador uses all the time, and he said empowering, to empower people. So this is really what the ambassador's mission is about, is to help empowering people. And but I don't think people are even aware. And so his other part of his mission is the war on ignorance. And this is where people like yourself come onto the GoldFish Report and help us understand that there's something else out there, and that there's an alternative, there's options, that we're not stuck in this present system, like you said, system. And you used very specific words very carefully and at choice times, which I know I'm going to be listening to this several times in order to go back and listen to all the choice words and how they were used, because I understand they have a very, very big effect. But Winston, we want to thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your time. It was very generous of you. And I want to thank everyone on our panel, and John and Martin Radagast, Steve, and also the ambassador for their time. And we want to remind our viewers to follow us on Facebook. We have a media page. We publish an update daily. We run about 250 to 300 stories a week on our Facebook page, the GoldFish Report. We also want to remind all of our viewers to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also to look at our archives of our previous interviews that we've done. And by all means, we welcome your comments and suggestions. And we want to say thank you for joining us. And this concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.